Thank you so much. Great to be here. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Great. So my name is Marielle. I'm actually originally from the Netherlands. I live in London with my Colombian husband, and I work for an African university. So I usually just call myself a global confusion. This is one of our students. Her name is Amina. She's a fourth-year social science student from Morocco. She's part of our inaugural class, and she will graduate from the African Leadership University this coming June. After her first year at ALU, she did an internship at a UNHCR refugee camp in Morocco. Here she encountered a young girl called Adja. This was a girl from Nigeria, 17 years old, who left her home and her country behind, looking for better opportunities and looking for a better life in France. She fell into the hands of human traffickers instead. So we don't really want to think what happened to Adja on this perilous journey across the continent. But what is important here is that there's an encounter of these two girls. One girl who was driven by so much despair that she decided that the only way to have a better future was to leave her country and continent behind. The other girl, a student, very similar in age, who actually believed that she could be a catalyst for change for Africa. And as she says it herself, who is in constant pursuit of bridging the gap between who she is and the change that can be. 6,000 days. It's going to be 6,000 days before Africa will have the largest young workforce in the world. It's actually a little bit less than that. It's 5,780 days today until 2035, which is the year that Africa will have the largest workforce in the world. 1 billion people. That's larger than India, that's larger than China. At the end of this century, 40% of the entire world population will live in Africa. Let's just think for 1 minute what that means, not just for Africa, but for the world. The impact that has on education, on infrastructure, on food, on jobs, on security, on the environment, on the movement of people. We're sitting potentially on the brink of a global disaster. And it's stories like the one of Adja that make us acutely aware of what this disaster could be. But we can also look at this not just as a disaster, but as an enormous source of prosperity and opportunity. Africa's greatest treasure is its youth. Africa as a continent has the youngest population in the world. So the average age of an African is 19 and a half. Here in the US, it's 40. In Germany, it's about 46. So if you think about the potential and the talents that we're sitting on, that is waiting to be unlocked, that can be the next source of energy for the continent, the next source of innovation, of opportunity. I mean, the next Elon Musk, who is also African, which not everyone knows, can already be out there, just waiting to be unlocked. So what will make the difference, what will determine the difference between this potential disaster and this promise of prosperity that could really drive the next, this coming century? And the one answer to that is education. So, as you might not know, Africa has the lowest tertiary education rates in the world. Only about 12% on average across the continent of students actually progresses from high school into higher education or to any kind of further education. Just to put that into perspective, that compares to about 26% in India, 30% in China, and more than 70% here in the United States. So if we wanted to build enough universities to even reach the same level of tertiary education as India, we would have to open 125 universities the size of Harvard every year for the next 17 years. That's an impossible task. So to rely on the traditional model of higher education to try and scale to the extent that we need in order to bring education to Africa, it's impossible. We can't rely on the traditional model of education, but we should also ask ourselves, do we want to rely on the traditional model of education, right? I think the traditional model of higher education, as Eric also referred to, has a lot of challenges. It's, we can argue that it's broken full stop, not just for Africa, but for the world. It was built at a time where it was relevant to that day and age, hundreds of years ago, but it hasn't really changed all that much over the last hundreds of years. Students everywhere So universities worldwide are actually trying to bridge the skills gap and are trying to kind of reinvent themselves and are trying to implement innovation, but they're kind of really bogged down by some of the legacies that they carry in the systems that they need to sustain. It's actually very hard to change something, that is so firmly rooted in a discourse that has been continued for centuries. It's actually much easier to start from scratch than to try and change something that already exists. So here we have two contexts. We have the context of Africa, and we have the context of a real global need for innovation and education. So Africa presents us not just with the urgent needs and the challenges, but it also presents us with a framework of opportunity. Because what better continent in the world, what better place in the world than the fastest growing continent in the world to actually try and develop new models of education, to critically rethink the current models that underlie our systems of education. Great opportunities, they are often disguised as impossible situations. So as John F. Kennedy, when he announced in 1962 that he wanted to put men on the moon, he said he didn't want to do that because it was easy, but he wanted to do that precisely because it was hard. So moonshots are often about doing hard things and about identifying a radical solution for what seems to be an impossible problem to solve. The ALU moonshot is to develop a movement of ethical and entrepreneurial leaders, 3 million leaders for Africa and the world by 2060, who will all be critically looking at solving some of the largest global challenges and finding emerging opportunities by building a network of radically reimagined universities. Unlike putting men on the moon, the ALU moonshot is actually trying to solve an earthbound problem and a real global challenge. And the only way that you can do that is by introducing a radical, bold, and completely non-conventional approach that really changes the way that we think about education. I actually saw one of, you quoted John Dewey as well. So this is maybe you know him, an American reformer and philosopher at the end of last century, who actually said then, more than 100 years ago, if we teach today the way we taught yesterday, we will rob our children of tomorrow, which I think rings so true, especially today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 main core principles in which we have completely reimagined the university model from scratch. So the first underlying principle of our model is that a learning system should be student-centered and not centered around teachers. Most learning models have always been centered around teachers because that made sense, because teachers were the people that were holding access to knowledge. Information was scarce, but nowadays information is obviously a click of the finger away. So that presents us with an enormous opportunity for students to learn in different ways, to teach themselves and also to teach each other. It's not that teachers are obsolete, but teachers are scarce and students are there in abundance. So the teacher, rather than being the only core of learning, it becomes part of the student's learning experience in a student-driven and peer-led learning environment. So the teacher's role becomes one of encouragement, of mentorship, and of facilitation. At ALU, all lectures are banned. We don't have any lectures at ALU at all. All classes are based on active learning. So students learn content in their own time, they study content in their own time and at their own pace. And when they come to class, they take that time to discuss, to analyze, and to apply the content of what they've learned, to apply that knowledge. So it's about mastery and not about memorization. And that brings me to the second principle of our learning model. And that is that a learning model should be centered around solving real-world problems and not learning facts and figures. And it should also be centered around teaching students skills, 21st century skills that they need to be successful in a changing world. As I already touched upon a little bit earlier, the skills gap is a real problem globally. So I recently read a report on the future of work by the World Economic Forum, And it says that as a consequence of the fourth industrial revolution, which is introducing artificial intelligence, big data analytics, etc., it's expected that about 75 million jobs will be displaced over the next 4 years. Here in the US alone, it's expected that about 1.4 million workers will be affected by this, and it's going to cost about $34 billion in order to upskill and reskill these workers. As on the plus side, though, is that there's also an expected 100 million new jobs that is going to be developed over the course of the next 4 years. But these are jobs that haven't been invented yet. You know, these are jobs that don't exist yet. 65% of students that are currently in high school will end up in jobs that haven't been invented yet. So the question becomes for a university, how do we as universities educate students for jobs, prepare them for jobs that don't exist yet? The answer is actually refreshingly simple by not preparing them or educating them for one specific job, but by equipping them with the tools and the skills that they need to be successful in any job, and that can help them to become the problem solvers and the leaders and the entrepreneurs to create jobs. At the core of ALU's curriculum lies what we call the leadership core. This is a set of 4 core courses that every student takes in their first year, no matter what subject area they're interested in studying. These 4 core courses, they all focus on developing what we have identified as 7 meta skills. We've identified those skills in collaboration with industries and employers. We've been asking employers around Africa and the world, what is it that you're looking for when you're hiring graduates, and what is it where current graduates actually fall short? And based on that, we have established these 7 meta skills, and these are skills like Eric was also mentioning, critical thinking, effective communication, leading self, leading others. From the second year, students are actually encouraged to declare a mission instead of choosing a major. The world is not organized in the silos of disciplines, right? So neither should education be. These missions, they're all centering around global challenges. We have identified 7 grand challenges and opportunities for the world. Things like urbanization, health, education. And our students are encouraged to solve to look at these challenges and to find sustainable solutions and to capture emerging opportunities. At ALU, students are focusing on solving real-world problems from the very first day that they study with us. We have organizations that come into universities, companies, entrepreneurs from all over Africa and the world. And our students, through project-based learning, they work with these companies to solve some of the issues that these companies are facing. So for instance, we had Uber coming to campus, and our students were tasked with developing a business model for how Uber could expand into Africa. And they actually presented this to Uber's senior team. So it's also a way of building a network and meeting people. At the end of every year, students take an internship. So that means that after their full undergraduate degree, they will have a whole year worth of work experience already under their belt, which really prepares them very well for the workforce. So to use the example of Amina again, apart from her internship at the United Nations, she also did an internship teaching orphans in Senegal, and she did some sub-Saharan research and education policy work as well. So the third and final principle is that education needs to be affordable. The only way of scaling education and of building a model that works is to make it affordable. Eric already touched upon the massive cost of student loan debt here in the United States. I think we're all struggling as universities worldwide with issues around affordability and accessibility. I don't want to get into that too much right now, but we all know what the reality of that challenge is, right? And we also all know that the return on investment of a college degree might not necessarily be that great anymore. So what we have done at ALU is we have developed a whole new student funding model called an income sharing agreement. The income sharing agreement is essentially a way of students to only pay a very little bit of their tuition fees up front and pay for the bulk of their education once they graduate and once they have a job. We have set up a finance company that raises funds and monies from impact investors. Students take a loan out of that, it's not a loan, students take money out of that fund with which they then pay the tuition fee. only when they start working and when they earn a certain salary, they start paying back into that fund, but they pay back relative to their salaries. That means if they don't ever get a job, which we don't hope, but imagine, they don't pay back. If they get a fairly lowly paid job, they pay back only relative to their salary. But if they become the next Elon Musk and start making millions of dollars straight away, they will actually pay back more into the fund. So this is a way not just of enhancing accessibility and affordability to education, but also instilling a sense of responsibility into our students and a way of paying it forward. Because the next generation of students will be able to then take money out of that fund. So we're now entering our 5th year at ALU. We have about 1,000 students across 3 locations in Mauritius, Rwanda, and in Kenya. We've reached some incredible milestones, but we have a very, very long way to go still, and time is ticking. Tomorrow there's only going to be 5,779 days until 2035. So time is ticking. So we have started this journey not just by taking one step, but by taking a massive leap. And we really hope that others will join us on this journey, and that the examples that we can bring are actually going to be examples that other universities will learn something from, and that will, as a collective, use these examples to transform education and to transform the future of global youth on a global scale. I just wanted to end with Amina again, finish the narrative where I started. So Amina is about to graduate this June, and she has an offer for a master's in social anthropology at SOAS in London, firmly in her pocket, which is great. And she, when I asked her about what her experience at ALU has been like for her journey, she says it has transformed her beyond anything that she could ever expect. And she used this proverb, which is a Moroccan saying, and I've been told, and I'm going to leave you with that, and leave it up to your interpretation. I've been told it means something along the lines of, you never leave a bathroom the same way that you entered it. So yeah, that's me. Thank you very much.